The sulfuric winds of Titan howled outside Outpost Prometheus, a research station that looked more like a metallic tumor grafted onto the moon's desolate landscape than a cutting-edge scientific facility. Inside, Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved with the controlled chaos of someone who had long ago stopped differentiating between crisis and opportunity. Her latest project wasn't just another scientific endeavor. It was her last chance. The Global Science Consortium had made it brutally clear: deliver breakthrough results or face total funding termination. 3 generations of Rodriguez scientists had built their reputation on impossible dreams, and Elena was determined not to be the one who would let that legacy crumble. The quantum communication array dominated the central laboratory, a massive construct of crystalline processors and superconducting coils that seemed to breathe with an almost living energy. Holographic displays danced around her, showing quantum entanglement patterns that would make most theoretical physicists weep with joy or frustration. Elena's personal history was etched into every circuit and calibration. Her grandmother, the first Rodriguez to challenge scientific orthodoxy, had pioneered quantum communication theories that were laughed out of academic conferences. Her mother had refined those theories, creating breakthrough neural quantum interfaces that were decades ahead of their time. And now, Elena was about to bridge the final gap. "Come on, you beautiful monster," she muttered, her fingers flying across multiple holographic interfaces. The array was a Frankenstein's monster of experimental technology, parts salvaged from canceled government projects, custom-built components, and theoretical designs that existed more in Elena's brilliant mind than in any technical manual. A notification pinged, another funding review meeting scheduled. The Global Science Consortium's representatives would be expecting a comprehensive report, and right now, all Elena had were promising but ultimately inconclusive results. Years of research, millions in grants, and she was still just shy of a breakthrough. The station's environmental systems hummed a low, persistent note. Titan's atmosphere pressed against the facility's reinforced walls, a constant reminder of the hostile environment just millimeters away. Most researchers would be unnerved by the isolation, but Elena found comfort in the silence. Here, away from bureaucratic committees and skeptical peers, she could push the boundaries of known science. Her current experiment targeted the most fundamental challenge in quantum communication, creating a stable, instantaneous communication method that could transmit information across potentially unlimited distances. Traditional quantum entanglement experiments had always been limited, controlled, short-range interactions that proved the principle but never delivered practical applications. Elena's approach was different. She was attempting to create a quantum resonance field that could potentially act as a communication bridge, using a revolutionary approach that combined neural quantum mapping with multidimensional signal projection. If successful, it would revolutionize everything from space exploration to interstellar communication. The array's temperature began to rise. Warning indicators flashed amber, then rapidly shifted to a concerning red. Any rational scientist would have initiated an emergency shutdown, but rationality had never been Elena Rodriguez's strongest trait. "Not now," she whispered, blocking the automatic safety protocols. "Not when we're this close." Her hands moved with surgical precision, adjusting quantum coherence levels that most researchers wouldn't even attempt to manipulate. The experimental quantum pulse generator, a device that looked like a cross between a particle accelerator and an art installation, began to vibrate, its internal components resonating at frequencies that seemed to defy physical laws. Something was happening. The holographic displays began to show patterns that shouldn't exist, quantum interactions that theoretical models had always claimed were impossible. Elena's heart raced. This was more than a potential breakthrough. This was the moment that could define an entire scientific generation. She didn't know it yet, but in the next few seconds, Dr. Elena Rodriguez was about to make first contact in the most unexpected way possible, completely by accident, and with absolutely no intention of doing so. The quantum array pulsed. Reality, for just a moment, seemed to hold its breath. The Zorn Central Communication Hub was a marvel of architectural precision, a massive spherical structure suspended in the gravitational nexus of their home system. Unlike human facilities that celebrated individuality, this was a testament to collective perfection. Every surface mathematically aligned, every system operating with clockwork synchronicity. Archival Administrator Vexnera sat in the central analysis chamber, surrounded by holographic data streams that represented centuries of meticulously collected communication protocols. The Zorn had spent millennia developing a communication system so refined that it made human diplomatic exchanges look like primitive grunting. When the first quantum pulse arrived, it didn't just break their communication models, it obliterated them. The initial detection caused a cascading alert that brought the entire central communication hub to a standstill. Quantum analysis teams, trained to interpret the most complex interstellar signals, found themselves staring at a transmission that defied every known principle of intelligent communication. "Impossible," muttered senior analyst Krelvax, his Neuralink implants working overtime to process the signal. What should have been a structured, mathematically precise communication was instead a chaotic burst of seemingly random information. Fragments of human consciousness tumble through the quantum channels, a mix of technical calculations, emotional outbursts, and contextually bizarre references. One of the junior analysts, Zix, noticed something the senior team missed. While the older Zorn saw only chaos, Zix detected underlying patterns, rhythms of thought that suggested a complexity far beyond their initial assessment. The transmission contained precise quantum calculations interrupted by a half-remembered pop song lyric, a frustrated commentary about a malfunctioning coffee machine, fleeting memories of a past relationship, technical specifications mixed with seemingly nonsensical emotional annotations. The Zorn communication protocols had multiple classification levels for alien transmissions. This didn't fit into any existing category. It was too complex to be random noise, yet too unstructured to be intentional communication. Deep in the archival records, Zix discovered something extraordinary. There were ancient theoretical texts, largely dismissed as philosophical speculation, that suggested communication might exist beyond pure information transfer. These texts, written by radical Zorn philosophers centuries ago, had been archived and forgotten, considered too heretical to discuss openly. The text proposed a revolutionary concept, that communication might be more than a precise exchange of information. They suggested the possibility of emotional resonance, contextual understanding that transcended pure data transfer. Vexnera called an emergency session of the Interstellar Communication Council, the chamber filled with the most brilliant communication experts in Zorn society, each more perplexed than the last. "This is not a message," declared the lead analyst. "This is something else entirely." Zix, the junior analyst, saw it differently. To him, the transmission looked like a window into an entirely different mode of understanding. The human signal carried an energy, a vibrancy that their own communication had long since engineered out of existence. The Zorn had spent generations perfecting communication to its most efficient form. Every transmission was calculated, every word measured, every emotional nuance suppressed in favor of pure information transfer. This human signal was the exact opposite, a beautiful, chaotic explosion of consciousness. Political implications quickly emerge. If this was how humans communicated, what did it mean for potential interstellar relationships? The transmission suggested a species that was simultaneously precise and wildly unpredictable. Some council members argued for immediate defensive protocols. Others, like Zix, saw an opportunity for unprecedented cultural exchange. "We cannot categorize this," Zix argued, his voice a rare display of passion among the typically reserved Zorn. "We must respond. We must understand." As debates rage, no one noticed the tiny quantum signature embedded deep within the transmission, a microscopic key that would unlock something far beyond their current understanding. The first contact had happened, and nobody, human or Zorn, had the slightest idea what it truly meant. Ambassador Krulvax's personal quarters were a testament to Zorn organizational perfection. Every object existed in precise mathematical relation to every other, a physical manifestation of their species' obsession with order and symmetry. Holographic displays covered the walls, each showing a different aspect of the mysterious human transmission that had consumed the Interstellar Communication Council for weeks. Unlike his peers, Krulvax had a secret. Buried deep beneath layers of bureaucratic conditioning was a fragment of curiosity that he'd spent centuries suppressing. This transmission was his chance to prove his diplomatic worth, and perhaps explore something beyond the rigid protocols that had defined his entire existence. The response document was already approaching 10,000 pages. Each page was a meticulously crafted blend of quantum physics, diplomatic protocol, and mathematical proofs that attempted to decode the human transmission. What began as an analysis had transformed into something between a scientific treatise, a philosophical exploration, and an unprecedented attempt to understand a completely alien form of communication. Zix, the junior analyst who had first noticed the deeper patterns in the transmission, was both a blessing and a challenge to Krulvax's mission. While most Zorn saw Zix's perspective as dangerously unorthodox, Krulvax recognized a strategic asset. The young analyst had begun compiling what he called contextual resonance maps, an entirely new approach to understanding interspecies communication. The transmission is not noise, Zix had argued during their last strategy meeting. It's a complex neural snapshot. Each fragment carries multiple layers of meaning, emotional, technical, personal. It's like a living communication. The Zorn had no equivalent concept. Their communication was always precise, always intentional. The idea of a living message was as foreign to them as the concept of spontaneous creativity. Preparation for first contact became a massive undertaking. The Zorn dispatched their most advanced research vessels, massive constructs that were part scientific laboratory, part diplomatic platform. Each ship was a marvel of engineering, capable of generating defensive quantum fields that could theoretically neutralize any potential threat. But the real preparation was happening in the communication departments. Teams of linguists, quantum physicists, and diplomatic experts worked around the clock. They developed specialized translation matrices, quantum interference filters, and contextual interpretation algorithms designed to make sense of the human transmission. Krulvax's personal preparation was even more intensive. He underwent specialized neural recalibration, a Zorn diplomatic technique that allowed for maximum adaptability during first contact scenarios. It was a process that pushed the boundaries of their neural plasticity, essentially preparing the mind to encounter truly unknown communication patterns. The ship selected for the mission was the Precise Intention, a diplomatic vessel that represented the pinnacle of Zorn technological achievement. Its exterior was a perfect geometric shape that seemed to defy conventional physics, its surface capable of instant reconfiguration based on quantum-level threat assessments. What no one knew was the internal conflict brewing within the diplomatic team. Zix's research had begun to challenge fundamental Zorn beliefs about communication and consciousness. His theories suggested that the human transmission represented a form of intelligence far more complex than anything the Zorn had previously encountered. "We are approaching this all wrong," Zix argued during a closed-door meeting with Krulvax. "This isn't just a message. It's a glimpse into an entirely different way of experiencing reality." Krulvax found himself torn, centuries of diplomatic training moored with a growing sense of intellectual excitement. The transmission represented more than a potential first contact. It was a challenge to everything the Zorn believed about intelligence, communication, and the nature of conscious experience. As the Precise Intention prepared for departure, a final piece of equipment was loaded, a device Zix had developed in secret. It was a quantum resonance mapper, designed to capture the most minute details of communication beyond traditional linguistic barriers. It was unofficial, untested, and completely against diplomatic protocols. But sometimes, breaking the rules is the only way to truly understand something new. The ship's quantum drives hummed to life. Destination: the solar system. Mission: make first contact with a species that had already fundamentally challenged everything the Zorn thought they knew about communication. They had no idea how unprepared they truly were. The first warning came from a deep space monitoring station in the Kuiper Belt. Dr. Samira Khan, head of Earth's Extraterrestrial Detection Division, stared at the holographic display with a mixture of disbelief and scientific excitement. The incoming vessel defied every known principle of spaceship design. A geometric anomaly that seemed to fold space around itself, rather than simply travel through it. "This is not possible," she muttered, her fingers dancing across quantum communication interfaces. The ship's approach violated multiple laws of physics, its movement more akin to a mathematical equation coming to life than a traditional spacecraft. At NASA's Crisis Command Center, panic was beginning to set in. Military advisors argued for defensive protocols, while scientific teams begged for observation time. The vessel made no traditional communication attempts. Instead, it broadcast an endless series of mathematical sequences that seemed to pulse with an almost living intelligence. Elena Rodriguez was summoned from her Titan research station with unprecedented urgency. As the inadvertent architect of this first contact, she found herself thrust into a role she was monumentally unprepared for. The government had vetted her extensively. Her quantum communication background made her the most qualified person to potentially understand the alien transmission. When she arrived at the command center, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Massive screens displayed the alien vessel's approach, its geometric perfection sending shivers through everyone present. It wasn't just a ship, it was a statement, a three-dimensional mathematical theorem made manifest. Zix watched from inside the precise intention, his neural interfaces working overtime. He had argued against the traditional diplomatic approach, suggesting a more adaptive method of first contact. Ambassador Krelvax had reluctantly allowed him a minor advisory role, never expecting the junior analyst's insights would become crucial. The vessel's arrival created a gravitational anomaly that scientific instruments struggled to comprehend. Quantum sensors went haywire. Satellite networks flickered. For a moment, it seemed like the very fabric of space-time was being gently, precisely manipulated. Dr. Khan's team discovered something extraordinary. The ship wasn't just approaching, it was communicating. Not through radio waves or traditional electromagnetic signals, but through complex gravitational wave patterns that encoded information at a fundamental quantum level. It's responding to the original transmission, Elena realized, her scientific mind racing. Not just receiving, but actively engaging with the quantum signature of that initial burst. The global response was a mixture of terror and fascination. Military installations went on high alert. Scientific communities around the world held their breath. This was the moment humanity had both anticipated and feared for generations. Zix had prepared something unprecedented. Hidden within the ship's communication systems was a quantum resonance mapper, a device designed to capture communication beyond traditional linguistic barriers. It was his secret weapon, a bridge between two fundamentally different forms of intelligence. As the ship entered lunar orbit, it began broadcasting. Not a message in any traditional sense, but a complex mathematical representation that seemed to dance between pure information and something more. Something almost emotional. Elena recognized fragments of her original transmission embedded within the alien communication. The coffee machine complaint, the half-remembered song lyric, the technical calculations. But now they were transformed, elevated, parsed through an alien intelligence that saw patterns humans couldn't even comprehend. "They're not just receiving," Elena whispered to Dr. Khan. "They're interpreting. Translating our chaos into their own language of pure information." The first visual representation of the Zorn appeared on the screens. They were nothing like human imagination had predicted. Not bug-like creatures or humanoid forms, but something that looked like a living mathematical equation, shifting, changing, communicating through their very existence. Ambassador Krelvac stood at the communication interface, centuries of diplomatic training compressed into this singular moment. He had no idea that the transmission he was about to deliver would change everything. For humans and Zorn alike, the universe held its breath. First contact was happening, and nobody, absolutely nobody, was prepared for what was about to unfold. The first physical meeting between humans and Zorn took place in a specially constructed neutral zone, a geodesic dome, at the heart of a secure research facility that looked more like an impossible architectural experiment than a diplomatic venue. The walls were designed to adapt to multiple atmospheric and gravitational conditions, a testament to humanity's preparation for the utterly unexpected. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of a delegation that represented the most diverse team ever assembled. Linguists, quantum physicists, diplomatic experts, and cultural anthropologists. Each brought a unique perspective to this unprecedented encounter, but none of them were prepared for what was about to happen. The Zorn delegation entered not as a group of individuals, but as a collective presence. They moved with a synchronicity that defied human understanding, less like a team and more like a living, breathing mathematical equation. Ambassador Krelvac stood at the forefront, his form constantly shifting, redefining the very concept of physical presence. Zix, the junior analyst, was the wild card. While other Zorn maintained their rigid diplomatic stance, he radiated an energy of curiosity that set him apart. His neural interfaces were working overtime, capturing every microscopic detail of the human environment. The initial moments were a symphony of miscommunication. Krelvac began with what the Zorn considered a standard diplomatic greeting, a complex mathematical sequence that mapped out their entire communicative intent. To the Zorn, this was the height of diplomatic sophistication. To the humans, it looked like an incomprehensible light show accompanied by a series of geometric transformations. Elena's response was pure human improvisation. Recognizing the futility of traditional translation, she pulled out the very coffee machine that had been part of her original quantum transmission. With a wry smile, she pressed a button, and the machine began to brew. The effect was immediate and unexpected. The Zorn delegation froze, or rather, their collective presence momentarily destabilized. Zix was the first to react, his form shifting to capture every microscopic detail of the brewing process. What humans saw as a simple act of making coffee, the Zorn interpreted as an intricate communication ritual. Dr. Imani O'Keefe, the lead linguist, watched in fascination. "They're not just listening," she whispered to Elena. "They're experiencing our communication on an entirely different level." Krelvac's diplomatic protocol began to break down. The coffee machine, the very object that had been part of the original transmission, was now being interpreted as a sacred communicative device. Each drop of brewing coffee became a complex message, each steam release a profound statement about human existence. Zix moved closer to the coffee machine, his form rippling with quantum-level analysis. To everyone's shock, he began to generate a response, not in words, but in a series of gravitational wave patterns that seemed to resonate with the coffee machine's internal mechanisms. The humans watched in stunned silence as the Zorn's communication method revealed itself. They weren't just talking. They were merging, experiencing, translating at a level far beyond human comprehension. Elena realized something profound. The Zorn weren't just trying to understand human communication. They were attempting to become it. Each interaction was an act of radical empathy, a complete immersion into an alien method of understanding. Dr. O'Keefe's linguistic algorithms went into overdrive. The translation matrix they had developed was useless. This wasn't translation. This was transformation. "We're not having a dialogue," she muttered. "We're performing a cosmic dance of understanding." Krelvac's formal diplomatic presentation began to deconstruct. The rigid mathematical sequences gave way to something more fluid, more alive. The coffee machine had become more than an object. It was a bridge between two fundamentally different ways of experiencing reality. As the first drops of coffee fell into the pot, something extraordinary happened. The Zorn's collective presence began to resonate with a frequency that matched the coffee machine's internal vibrations. It was as if the device was teaching them a language they had never known existed. Zix turned to Alina, his form now a complex interplay of quantum states and emotional resonance. No words were spoken. No traditional communication occurred. But in that moment, something far more profound happened. Understanding began. The global media had been shut out. National security protocols were at their absolute maximum. But inside the communication dome, something far more bizarre than any global broadcast could capture was unfolding. Alina Rodriguez realized that traditional explanation was not just futile, it was counterproductive. The Zorn had already demonstrated their ability to transform the most mundane human actions into complex cosmic communications, so she decided to lean into the absurdity. "Okay," she said to Krelvax and Zix, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Let me explain the true nature of human communication." What followed was a masterpiece of improvisational storytelling that would later be classified as the most important diplomatic interaction in human history. She began with the coffee machine, now elevated to a near-mythical status by the Zorn. "This device," Alina proclaimed, "is not just a beverage preparation unit. It is a complex ritual of temporal synchronization and emotional calibration." Her narrative wove together quantum physics, pop culture references, mathematical theorems, and completely nonsensical personal anecdotes. She described how humans use coffee machines as a form of diplomatic negotiation, a way of measuring social hierarchies, and a method of quantum entanglement between individuals. Dr. Imani O'Keefe, the linguist, watched in a mixture of horror and fascination. The translation algorithms were going haywire, generating output that looked more like abstract art than language. Zix's quantum resonance mapper was working overtime. Each seemingly random statement from Alina created complex interference patterns that the Zorn found increasingly fascinating. What humans would perceive as random storytelling, the Zorn interpreted as a profound method of information transfer. "The coffee machine," Alina continued, her voice taking on a pseudo-scientific tone, "is actually a portal between different states of human consciousness. When we press the brew button, we're not just making coffee, we're negotiating with quantum realities." She pulled out additional props. A smartphone became a dimensional communication device that allows humans to synchronize collective thought patterns. A laptop transformed into a neural network interface for emotional calibration. Krelvax's diplomatic protocols began to completely unravel. The more nonsensical Alina's explanation became, the more the Zorn seemed to lean in, their quantum state forms vibrating with what could only be described as excitement. Zix was particularly entranced. He began to generate responsive quantum patterns that attempted to mirror Alina's communication style, a bizarre dance of information that defied all known communication protocols. The research team watching through one-way interfaces could only stare in disbelief. Dr. Khan, the head of extraterrestrial detection, muttered, "This is either the most brilliant or the most insane first contact in human history." Alina's story continued to escalate. She described how humans use memes as a form of interstellar diplomacy, how dance moves are actually complex mathematical communication, and how facial expressions are a quantum-level language that can transcend physical barriers. At one point, she started singing a 1980s pop song, explaining it as a vibrational communication method that synchronizes emotional frequencies across human collective consciousness. The Zorn listened with what could only be described as rapt attention. Zix began to generate responsive quantum patterns. These weren't translations, they were collaborative improvisations. The Zorn were no longer just receiving information. They were participating in a form of communication that was simultaneously meaningless and profound. Dr. O'Keefe's linguistic algorithms gave up entirely. The translation matrix began generating poetry, mathematical equations, and what looked like abstract musical notation. Krelvax's diplomatic training, centuries of rigid protocol and precise communication, was completely dismantled. The Zorn were experiencing something far beyond information exchange. They were witnessing a living, breathing, constantly evolving form of communication. As Elena reached the climax of her improvised explanation, involving a complex narrative about how humans use dad jokes as a form of quantum entanglement, something extraordinary happened. The Zorn's collective presence began to laugh. Not in any human sense. It was a quantum-level resonance that vibrated through the entire communication dome. A laugh that was simultaneously a mathematical equation, an emotional response, and a fundamental recalibration of their understanding of intelligence. First contact was no longer about information. It was about understanding. The aftermath of the first contact was nothing short of a global paradigm shift. Within days, the world's academic and scientific institutions were completely restructured. Traditional disciplines collapsed and reformed into entirely new fields of study. Quantum communication anthropology became a legitimate doctoral program. Universities scrambled to create departments that could begin to comprehend the new understanding of intelligence that the Zorn encounter had revealed. Dr. Elena Rodriguez found herself at the epicenter of a scientific revolution she never intended to create. Government agencies, research institutions, and international bodies fought for her attention. Her quantum communication lab on Titan was transformed into a global research hub, with scientists from every continent competing for a chance to work with her. The Zorn's perspective on humanity had transformed completely. What they had initially perceived as a chaotic, unstructured form of communication was now understood as a sophisticated, adaptive intelligence that could transform and respond to complex scenarios in ways their own rigid systems could never achieve. Zix had become something of a revolutionary within Zorn society. His documentation of the human encounter challenged fundamental beliefs about communication, consciousness, and the nature of intelligence. Conservative Zorn leadership found themselves increasingly marginalized as younger generations embraced a more fluid understanding of interaction. The economic implications were staggering. Companies that specialized in communication technologies found themselves obsolete overnight. New industries emerged that focused on adaptive intelligence translation, technologies that could bridge fundamentally different modes of understanding. Global political structures began to shift. Traditional diplomatic approaches became laughably inadequate. Nations that could quickly adapt to the new understanding of communication gained unprecedented global influence. Diplomatic academies were forced to completely reimagine their training programs. Most surprisingly, the encounter sparked a renaissance in human creativity. The Zorn's ability to find profound meaning in seemingly random human expressions encouraged a global celebration of improvisation, spontaneity, and non-linear thinking. Art underwent a dramatic transformation. Musicians created compositions that were simultaneously mathematical equations and emotional experiences. Visual artists developed techniques that could communicate across quantum resonance frequencies. Literature became a multi-dimensional experience that could be simultaneously read, felt, and mathematically analyzed. The technological breakthroughs were equally profound. Quantum communication devices began to emerge that could translate not just words, but entire experiential contexts. A simple conversation could now carry layers of emotional, mathematical, and contextual information that previous technologies could never have imagined. Krelvax, once the epitome of rigid Zorn diplomatic protocol, became an unlikely advocate for a new form of interspecies communication. His reports and analyses became required reading across multiple alien civilizations, documenting humanity's unique ability to find meaning in chaos. Scientific research took unexpected turns. Neuroscientists discovered that human brains possessed quantum-level communication capabilities that had previously gone unnoticed. The line between creativity and scientific calculation began to blur. Space exploration programs were revolutionized. The encounter suggested that the universe might be filled with intelligences that communicate in ways entirely different from what humans had previously imagined. Mission parameters were completely redesigned to be more adaptive, more open to unexpected forms of interaction. Educational systems worldwide underwent radical transformations. Schools began to teach adaptive intelligence as a core subject. Creativity, improvisation, and the ability to find meaning in seemingly random information became more valued than traditional linear learning. The global economy shifted. Companies that could demonstrate adaptive communication strategies gained massive competitive advantages. Investment in research that explored nonlinear intelligence skyrocketed. Zix published a groundbreaking work titled The Quantum of Communication, which became a pivotal text in understanding interspecies interaction. The book was simultaneously a scientific treatise, a philosophical exploration, and an artistic experience, proving its own thesis with its very existence. For Elena Rodriguez, the most profound change was personal. The accidental quantum pulse that had started everything had transformed her from a brilliant but marginalized researcher to a global icon of scientific innovation. Her original research, once considered too radical, was now the foundation of an entirely new scientific paradigm. As humanity looked to the stars, something had fundamentally changed. The universe was no longer a place to be conquered or understood through rigid scientific methods. It was a dynamic, communicative system waiting to be experienced. And it all started with a quantum pulse, a coffee machine, and an impossible conversation. 30 years after the initial quantum transmission, the universe had become an entirely different place. The Interstellar Cultural Exchange Museum stood as a testament to humanity's most unexpected achievement. Located on the border between human and Zorn territories, it was less a traditional museum and more a living, breathing communication experiment. Visitors didn't just observe exhibits, they participated in them. Elena Rodriguez, now in her 70s, served as the museum's primary curator and living legend. Her original coffee machine, the catalyst of first contact, was enshrined in the central exhibit, surrounded by holographic displays that told the impossible story of how a broken coffee maker had changed the course of galactic civilization. Zix, no longer a junior analyst but a respected diplomat and cultural theorist, worked alongside Elena. Their collaboration had become legendary, a partnership that bridged not just two species, but two fundamentally different ways of experiencing reality. The museum's most popular exhibit was the Quantum Communication Playground, an interactive space where visitors could experience communication as the Zorn first understood human interaction. Children and adults alike would spend hours creating elaborate narratives using seemingly random objects, mathematical equations, emotional resonances, and improvised performances. Galactic anthropologists had developed an entirely new field of study. The Rodriguez-Zix principle was now a fundamental concept in understanding interspecies communication. Universities across multiple civilizations taught how humanity's ability to find meaning in chaos had revolutionized understanding of intelligence. But the most profound changes were deeply personal. Hybrid communication networks now allowed for experiences that transcended traditional language. A simple conversation could carry layers of mathematical precision, emotional depth, and contextual understanding that would have seemed impossible just decades earlier. The original quantum transmission had become something of a creation myth. Academic conferences would spend entire sessions analyzing the microscopic details of Elena's accidental communication. Philosophers debated its meaning. Artists created performances that attempted to recreate its quantum complexity. Zix had written multiple best-selling books, each one a mind-bending exploration of communication that was simultaneously a scientific treatise, a work of art, and a philosophical meditation. His latest work, Chaos is Language, had won unprecedented awards across multiple alien civilizations. The economic and technological implications continued to ripple across the galaxy. Adaptive intelligence technologies had become the most valuable commodity. Companies that could navigate complex, non-linear communication strategies dominated interstellar markets. Space exploration had transformed completely. Instead of seeking to conquer or catalog, human and Zorn explorers now approached new civilizations as opportunities for mutual understanding. The rigid protocols of previous centuries had been replaced by a more fluid, improvisational approach to first contact. On her 70th birthday, Alina received a special gift from the Zorn Diplomatic Corps. It was a quantum resonance device that could translate entire life experiences into shareable moments. The gift was accompanied by a communication that was part mathematical equation, part emotional symphony, part historical documentation. Zix stood beside her as she activated the device. "Do you remember," he asked, his form shimmering with quantum-level nuance, "how this all began?" Alina laughed, a sound that was simultaneously a human expression of joy and a complex mathematical representation of emotional resonance. The museum around them seemed to pulse with the memory of that first, impossible transmission. The coffee machine gleamed under its protective field, a reminder that the most profound discoveries often come from the most unexpected places. Younger generations would never fully understand how close humanity had come to missing this extraordinary moment of connection. The accidental quantum pulse that started everything had been moments away from being dismissed as a simple equipment malfunction. Outside the museum, human and Zorn children played together in communication parks, spaces designed to explore the infinite possibilities of interaction. They would create elaborate narratives using quantum resonance devices, mathematical equations, emotional projections, and pure imagination. The universe had become a conversation, and it was just getting started.